Well, I think Charlie's getting a big turnout at his council meeting tonight, so.
Good morning, everyone. Opening the meeting today, I would like to acknowledge that this meeting of the Swan Valley Statutory Planning Committee is being live streamed, and I welcome everyone that is logged on to the meeting today. The meeting is being recorded and will be available for viewing via the Commission's website or YouTube. I wish to advise observers that committee members may refer to technical devices such as phones and laptops throughout the meeting to assist them in considering the information before them. In opening the meeting, I also acknowledge that we meet today on the traditional lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. Our respect to their elders, past and present. Attending in person today, myself, Commissioner Cole, Member Franklin, Member Burt, Member Rex, and Member Zanino. And we have apologies from Commissioner Brooks. Are there any applications for leave of absence? Thank you. Item 1.3, disclosures of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please? No, thank you. Item 1.4, declaration of due consideration. Could all members indicate that they have read the agenda? Thank you. And item 1.5, the minutes of the meeting of the 27th of November are with us for confirmation. Could I have a move and a seconder that we adopt those minutes, please? By Member Nino, seconded by Member Franklin. No dissent. Thank you very much. That brings us to item 2, deputations and presentations. There are none. Thank you. Item 3, non-confidential items for discussion, decision or noting. And we have item 3.1, the Swan Valley Draft Planning Strategy, certification to advertise. Welcome, Mark and Anthony. And gentlemen, you have a presentation to give us, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if you're happy for us to take off, I'll give a little brief introduction and then Anthony will go through a little overview. Obviously, the document, you have a report before you and copies of the strategy and its supporting documents. The Swan Valley Planning Scheme sets out that a strategy can be prepared for the scheme area, and it must be prepared in accordance with the Planning and Development Local Planning Schemes regulations. Obviously, this is a slightly strange situation where the strategy is coming in after the scheme is in effect. So we are retrofitting a little bit. The strategy itself will set out the long-term planning directions for the scheme area over the next 15 years. As you'll be aware, the strategy is going to be based heavily in the Act and the specific objectives or the objects of the Act, as it's mentioned, and you'll see that in your report. The Swan Valley Planning Act and the scheme themselves were obviously both heavily influenced by the findings and recommendations of the earlier Swan Valley Planning Review, known as the Kabelki Review, and the follow-up Swan Valley Action Plan. So over the last 18 months or so of my being in the department and working with Anthony and us both working with all of the various residents, stakeholders in the Swan Valley Leadership Group, we've learned quite a bit about the Valley, and the findings of these previous documents definitely still apply in the main, and the resolutions and answers to rectifying some of those issues we hope to start applying through the strategy, although we don't believe they're going to be fully explored at this stage. We've got to keep going. As some of our members will know, there's a lot of divergent views from residents and business owners in the Valley of how things should go. And there's quite a few issues that still need to be dealt with. We've clearly seen, and working with the leadership group, that the Valley itself is changing quite significantly at the moment. And the future's not 100% clear. We're losing a lot of vines. There's very few vines that are left in the Valley compared to 60, 70 years ago. And there's a mixture of things that's going on there. We've got an exacerbation by water and environmental issues that are causing the loss of vines. We've also got economic issues, and we've also now got the transition of a lot of grape growers into retirement and seeing that the families don't want to continue along in that business. So the protection of the agricultural and the viticultural components of the valley, they're still an important part of the strategy. We don't know if there'll be new forms of agriculture that may come into the valley or a change in the viticulture, but we're still trying to roll that into the strategy. Now, obviously, it's clear from those previous documents and this document that tourism and the hospitality uses we think can be leveraged upon to support some of the agricultural activities and uses in the valley. But the exact form and function of those tourism uses are still to be determined. And again, there's diverging views in the valley about how they should best be constructed, developed in the future. So our strategy that we've prepared now seeks to support what's already in the scheme and hopefully provide some guidance to help us address and start to rectify some of these issues and better explore the future of the valley. It obviously identifies that there's a lot of extra work still to be done. Our work with the leadership group has also identified that there's quite a few major issues in the valley that need to be addressed, but they fall outside of the planning regime and the framework. And a couple of those are the reinvigoration of the Swan River itself. The chair of the leadership group has been working with the government and other government departments talking about the potential opening up of the river again, dredging, trying to get navigable up further and beyond than what it is now. We've also got issues of infrastructure that is required in the valley if we're going to look to do greater tourism uses, particularly accommodation. Without sewer through most of the valley, it's very difficult to attract development of a reasonable size. And there's some other water-related issues around the reduction in the amount of water that the viticulture and the agricultural uses are going to be getting over the next 10 to 15 years. And again, they're issues we're exploring with the leadership group outside of the strategy. We have mentioned them in the strategy, but they're not things that are directly able to be addressed through the planning framework. So Anthony's going to give a brief overview of how we've got to this draft of the strategy and just some highlights, and then we'll probably open up for questions.
Bit of a PowerPoint that I can talk to some key points on. Thanks, Sam.
Taking this time.
Yep. So as we know, the planning framework, Swan Valley, is established by the Swan Valley Planning Act 2020, which includes enabling the preparation of the Swan Valley Planning Scheme. And under the Act, the local planning scheme regulations applies if the Swan Valley Planning Scheme is a local scheme, and references to local government reference to the WAPC. And Regulation 11 of those regulations require that a local planning strategy is prepared for every local planning scheme. So in terms of just some background, Sam, as Mark mentioned, the strategy has been informed by some previous work including the Kabelki Review and the Swan Valley Action Plan, but also we've been working with Tourism WA, who have commissioned what they call a Swan Valley Tourism Planning Strategy to help inform our planning strategy for the Swan Valley. And the City of Swan has also recently adopted its Swan Valley Local Area Plan. Thanks. So in terms of some consultation that we've already had, as Mark mentioned, the strategy's been prepared in consultation with the Swan Valley Strategic Leadership Groups. We've had a number of workshops and working meetings with them, identifying key issues and opportunities. We've also met with the City of Swan, Main Roads WA and Tourism WA, just in terms of identifying some of those key issues. And so in terms of the draft planning strategy itself, the form and content and structure of the documents follows the local planning strategy guidelines prepared by the WAPC. So that sets out that the structure should be in two parts. Part one is the planning strategy itself, which goes through identifying the issues, then planning directions for those issues. And in this respect, we've substantially used the objectives of the Act as the directions. And then for each of those directions, there's actions, the rationale for those, and some time frames. And then part two of the strategy sets out all the background information and analysis. And that's where we include a lot of the rationale for the existing planning scheme. So the planning strategy groups the key planning issues under these four headings that are set out in the state planning framework. Thanks. And in terms of just key actions that we've identified, so it's really about preparing new planning policies that define the rural character of the Swan Valley and provide further guidance for the assessment of rural character, including built form guidelines. A planning policy to provide further guidance for the consideration of landscape values, reviewing the Swan Valley planning framework in response to the tourism planning strategy that's been prepared by Tourism WA, amending the Swan Valley planning scheme to, or in accordance with the new short-term rental accommodation regulations. So there's certain sort of specific amendments that need to be made to be consistent with those regulations. Also investigating future land use options for the area east of the railway, which is essentially the Swan Valley rural zone. Further consideration to water licensing regime specific to the Swan Valley. As Mark mentioned, preparing a strategy for extending a reticulated sewage service into priority areas, and then issues around or opportunities around rehabilitating the Swan River. Thanks, Sam.
You want to do it?
Oh, sorry. So in terms of the next step, we're recommending that the strategy itself is advertised for 60 days. And then there'd be also targeted stakeholder consultation in terms of the Swan Valley Strategic Leadership Group, the City of Swan, key government agencies and local interest groups. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will open it up for questions. Questions? Frank, thank you.
I'm interested with the Appendix 1, the tourism work that has been done fairly recently, and how that sort of, you've mentioned it, but it's sort of inform the preparation of the strategy. I'm just wanting to, because it now comprises an appendix to the strategy, how, if it's integrated enough or has been signalled enough in the preparation of the strategy. I noticed on page 56, it cross-references the appendix in the strategy. But yeah, I'm just really it was a bit of a surprise almost when I saw the appendix at the end of the document of how that works and has informed the preparation of the strategy.
Yeah, through the chair. Yeah, I guess there was, we spent a lot of time with Tourism WA in the preparation of that study, and that study itself was informed by the consultants who prepared it, undertaking a lot of consultation with local interest groups and the community and so on. I guess we saw that the tourism planning strategy has a lot of like findings and recommendations and analysis, and tourism is such a key component of the Swan Valley, but it's also it's a difficult issue to deal with because the way the Act and the scheme is written, tourism is required to be incidental to agriculture essentially in the Swan Valley. It's quite a complex issue there. So I suppose we just thought there was so much background information and analysis contained in that strategy that it would be worth including that as an appendix to the planning strategy itself.
Right. All I'm just saying is that there probably needs to be a better connection or sort of rationale for the inclusion of it as an appendix. It's not clear in the document, the relationship. And if it is warranted, knowing that there has been so much other work in this area, why has this been given the prominence in as an appendix to the document? I must admit there is quite a lot of interesting information in there. May well need to be brought through into the strategy document.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Cole.
Thanks, Chair. I had a similar question to Member Franklin. I wondered whether having it as an appendix is sort of then read into the strategy and whether that was the right place for it, whether it should sort of sit out being referenced but stand alone as its own document. It just seemed a little bit unusual to have it sort of read into the strategy, if you like, the technical term, but that was a question. Apart from that, I think that the strategy itself is very thorough, and I think that it's very well laid out. There wasn't anything that came to mind. Anything question I had, I would then find it within the strategy. So I think that is a job very well done. There's just that question about whether the tourism planning strategy should link with the planning strategy as an appendix.
Through you, Chair. Look, I think that's something we're happy to be guided on. Obviously, this is a document that's prepared by another government agency. There's parts of it we do and don't agree with. It hasn't been out for a public form of advertising, so perhaps it is better that it is separated. And we get comments on both parts of the so that we can then bring them into maybe a final draft. It's just that obviously it had been undertaken at the request of the Minister and ourselves and the Commission. So we wanted to include it somehow in the document, but yeah, perhaps there's a better way to do it.
Can I just add, I guess, that it's an appendix to part 2, which is the background information and analysis. So it's which informs part 1, so that the actions and the strategy itself are contained in part 1, and part 2 is the background information and so on. And that's, I guess, that was the thinking on appending it to part 2. yeah, I mean, if there is concern about that, I think it would be left out if need be.
Perhaps, Chair, and through you, is there maybe a way we call it something else rather than having the word strategy in its name as well? Or is it tourism advice paper or something? I'm not sure.
Well, is the purpose to release it at the same time as the planning strategy? Is that, would you release them separately as two standalone documents? I know it's owned by another agency, but perhaps the approach would be that you'd release the strategy and that there would be a link to this alongside it.
I must admit, Mark, when I read it last week, I thought that's very strange, having it as part of itself. It should be referenced by the strategy. Those were my thoughts. Are there any further questions, please? Member Rex, thank you.
Through you, Chair. There's a few in the strategy. There's a few mistakes that will cause ripples once it's released. But I tell you.
I was going to call it something else.
So yeah, I was amazed at some of the mistakes. Like the recommendation is that Goodgery Road should be a tourist road. It goes nowhere. It has no vines on it. There's dilapidated chook sheds on two of the properties, and it's a dead end road. Why would you make that a tourist road? That's the first one. The fact that they say there's no access to the river, nil. We've got it there, nil. Well, there's three areas: there's Lilac Hills, Middle Swan Reserve, and there's Marley Bridge Park. So they're glorious to me. There's a few others which I'm going to make. One of the ones that is concerned, though, is that the Swan River Planning Review report of the Minister back in 2008, there are 6 items that were recommended back then that should be done that haven't been done. So the faith in these reports is waning, shall I say. So I have real issues putting it out to the public as well.
Sorry, Chair, through you, are you talking about the tourism
Strategy
component?
report, yeah.
Yeah.
Glaring.
Well, we're happy to take those and speak to Tourism WA.
Well, for example, like one of their things are only 34 vineyards. Come on. It's a bit of a joke.
Sorry, which one was that? Remember?
They have a drawing that says it underlines, it says it's 34 vineyards.
More reason to.
I just,
So Mark, you've made a note of those comments.
Yes.
Any further questions or comments, please? Keep in mind, this is a document that's going out to advertising.
Yep.
So no doubt there will be a lot of interest. A lot of submissions. Yeah.
The question of, through you, Chair, you keep mentioning sewerage to priority areas. If you're going to do it, you can't have it on one side of the valley and not the other, because we know that there'll be criticism if it's this Great Northern Highway, because certain people have influence on that side where West Swan Road have no influence. So we're careful in that area, I think.
Through you, Chair. Yes, look, the way we're trying to page it is that it would be a overall strategy would need to be prepared for the provision of sewer with priority 1, 2, 3, 4 areas, but it certainly would need to be provided up Great Northern Highway and West Swan Road.
Thank you. Member Franklin?
Yeah, I just had one other question was, there's some commentary about seeding foreshores, and that most part is done on subdivision, but there was perhaps a need to explore other mechanisms. I just wanted to find out what was being sort of considered as part of that. I mean, is there any potential management of those kind of comments in a document going out for public advertising?
Through you, Chair, and Anthony might help me there. We haven't explored that at great length yet. We talked in-house about the ways outside of subdivision through some in development control and other ways, but we certainly don't want to commit the commission to buying all the potential land along the foreshore there. Perhaps I think Matt might have some comments there as well from his history in the site.
Through you, Chair, it was definitely about not getting the commission, if there was an opportunity through subdivision and over a very long period of time to secure and potentially put easements in place through either conditions or agreements with owners, extend it. And obviously that was, to go back to your question before about public access to the river. There, as you say, there's only 3 locations, but it's about also providing access in other opportunities, other locations to the river. That's where foreshore reserve, because I think there's only a couple of streets that actually extend right through to the river. So putting in place appropriate mechanisms, but it would take a long time to a network to occur, similar to what we've got this
Thank you.
into the river.
Mr. Chair, there are 2, 4, 6 roads gazetted to the river that have been built. So there's far more access available.
If through you, Chair, yes, we agree that they are unconstructed road reserves, and that's literally if they are unconstructed. And then when you get to the end, you are then traversing public land, private land, either side of those areas, because there is no foreshore reserve.
Thank you, Member Hurt.
Speaking on the same situation, there was a Bells Rapids master plan. Part of that was going down to the river up from the east side. So I was wondering if that had been restored. Might be.
That specific.
Yeah, it was an opportunity. It went on for some years to see what the results were of that.
Thank you, Member Zanino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make a couple of observations. Initially, when the Swan Valley Planning Act was put in place, which was way back in 1995, the specific purpose was to try and preserve viticulture. That was the prime reason for putting the Act in place. When the Act was revised back in 2020, I suppose we've got the new Act now, the main emphasis once again was the retention or preservation of viticulture. If you go back 20, 30 years, obviously the Act has done nothing to preserve viticulture because viticulture has diminished significantly, and even today is coming out at the rate of knots. I mean, I went last night to a grape growers Christmas function, and I was speaking to Colin Gordon, who Colin has been part of the ag department, basically in viticulture all his life for the past 50 years. And we were having a chat, and I said to him, I says, the way I see it, you know, within another maybe 15, 20, 25 years, we're not going to have a lot of vines left in the valley. And he just looked at me, he goes, really? He says, you give it that long? I says, why? What do you think? And he says, I'd say 5 years, which surprised me. Now, the Act, I don't know. I mean, is the Act now changing focus? Are we changing the focus from viticulture to tourism? I mean, we still have to try and preserve, because, I mean, in the main attractor to the valley is the vines, the grapes. Because you can have, if you went through the whole Swan Valley, removed all the grapes, and the vines and just had total just tourism outlets, excuse me, it would not have the same appeal and attraction, right? I mean, the Swan Valley now, because of the ambience, most venues are totally booked out for functions, birthdays, parties, weddings. Most weddings are now held in the Swan Valley. And it's purely because of the ambience. And so we really need to kind of refocus, put our thinking caps on and say, well, hang on, how do we retain? How do we encourage growers to retain the viticultural aspect? Because once we lose the viticulture, I think it changes the valley forever.
And I think Mr. Szabo recognised that in his introduction.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a whole lot of things that impact on the reduction of the grapes, particularly the water licenses, you all know. So I don't believe that the strategy actually encourages the removal of the vines.
No, it doesn't, but
But
we have to try and encourage them to retain them.
I appreciate
The other question I had was the proposal or the act is going to be advertised for 60 days.
strategy, yes.
Yeah. When does the 60 days start?
Through
We
you,
were to approve it, adopt it today for advertising. Mark, when would it start?
yes, through you, Chair, that again, we'd put that open to the committee. If they want to avoid the Christmas period, we could start it in the first half of January or something like that. But
Yes.
certainly we would extend it if we did start over Christmas, but I think the minimum is 42 days anyway, and we've put it at 60 to make it a bit longer, but it's up to the
It's
committee.
just that because it coincides with the Christmas New Year break, a lot of people have a lot of family things, and if they're businesses, they're busy with the Christmas New Year. Wineries, vineyards are busy with vintage because of the grapes, wine grapes, table grapes, whatever it may be. And they don't have a lot of time to be able to sit down, because this is a fairly intensive document. It's not a short document that you can just wrap your head around quickly. So what I'm saying is we really need to put it out there, possibly after the vintage, after the grapes and the wine, when the locals, because this affects the locals, most of them, when they've got actual time to be able to sit down and give it, some proper thought, because otherwise it'd be a kind of rushed, or otherwise people will just say, oh, look, it's too hard, I won't do it.
So if we were to adopt it, I'll come to that, Friday, the 31st of January could be a date that we as a committee set for advertising to commence for 60 days.
Better get through to March.
So my next question is, do committee members feel that the strategy, given the comments that have been made and some of the amendments that are going to be made, do you feel the strategy is now fit for advertising?
I think so. I mean, you've got to put it out there and see what feedback you get. I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to rely mainly on the feedback, because it's important that we place importance on those comments from people that are directly affected, rather than, us just sitting around a table and saying, well, because it doesn't directly, well, it affects me because I'm part of the valley and I've got a vineyard, but it doesn't affect. So yeah, we need to.
Okay, thank you very much. Do I have a mover and a seconder then that we adopt the recommendation, noting that the advertising would commence on the 31st of January for 60 days? Moved by Member Zanino, seconded by Member Hurt. Any dissent?
Can I also an amendment to remove the Swan Valley Tourism Planning Strategy from the Appendix 1?
Yes, I took that as read, but we can move that as an amendment. Is there a seconder to that amendment? Second by member Franklin. Sent to that amendment. Right, Mark, and you can work out the mechanics of how we separate food and advertise them together. Thank you very much. So with that amendment to sent to the amended motion. Thank you. That's approved. We now move to item 4, confidential items for discussion, decision or noting. And the Swan Valley Statutory Planning Committee will move to the consideration of said items. And in doing so, I seek a move and a second to resolve that the meeting be closed to members of the public. Moved by member Zanino, seconded by member Rex.